We've talked about Ant as being one of those kids with no fear.
Yeah.
He's on TNT after Game 7 talking about, I got Kyrie.
Yeah.
What did you think of that matchup and kind of that game within the game?
Yeah, no, as a peer, man, I love that. I love it, man. It's nothing better. When Ant was a little bit younger, I'm sure he was watching me, and when he was in high school, I was watching him. So for me, it's more of those exciting matchups that I look forward to too. Right after the game, it was funny because he said it right then and there, and I think the whole world was looking like, okay, you better know what you're talking about, and I respect that, and that no fear mentality that he has is why I love him as a competitor and why I love him as a person. But when we're on that court, I know he's gonna give his all. I'm gonna give him my all, and at the end of the game, it's all love, and we're in between those lines. He knows what it is, and I know what it is.
On this episode of Inside the Mavs, how did the Mavs get greedy to take a 2-0 series lead as we look ahead to Game 2 of the Western Conference Finals between the Timberwolves and your Dallas Mavericks? This is Inside the Mavs. Welcome to Inside the Mavs, presented by Aura. I'm your host, Kevin Gray, Mavericks Pre and Post Game host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. Appreciate you joining me here for the latest episode of Inside the Mavs. Make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. And if you're watching this on my YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports, make sure you like and comment on the video and let me know how you're feeling about the Mavericks heading into Game 2 of the Western Conference Finals. And you can follow me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. The Mavericks get ready to try and take a 2-0 series lead on Friday night when they take on Anthony Edwards and the Minnesota Timberwolves in Game 2 of the Western Conference Finals, as the Mavericks already up 1-0 after their 108-105 win on Wednesday. Look to get greedy in Minnesota before they come back for Games 3 and 4, of course, beginning on Sunday. But for the Mavericks, a golden opportunity to be able to continue to build on the momentum that they got, stealing home court advantage in game number 1, having already taken care of business, leaving Minnesota by the time we get to the end of Friday night with at least a split in this series, which means they've done the hard part as they get ready to come back home to Dallas for Game 3 beginning on Sunday. The Mavericks now 5-2 this postseason on the road, as they continue to play terrific basketball, and as you saw in game number 1, be able to take the Minnesota Timberwolves out of their game, where you saw Anthony Edwards struggle from the field, going 6 of 16, where the Mavericks will need to continue to do much more of that in game number 2 as they look to try and take that 2-0 series lead. Throughout the course of our episode, discussing the keys to victory for the Mavericks going into Game 2 and what they need to continue from Game 1 to be able to go up 2-0. We mentioned Anthony Edwards right off the top, because for the Minnesota Timberwolves in the playoffs so far, when he is getting at least 20 attempts from the field, the Timberwolves are 5-1. When he's getting less than 20 attempts during a game during these playoffs, the Timberwolves are just 3-3. And as we mentioned just a second ago, Anthony Edwards went 6 of 16 from the field. Yes, he did have the 11 rebounds and the 8 assists, and was trying to make plays for his teammates, but the inability for him to get downhill, where he only took 4 shots in the paint, was a big reason why the Mavericks were able to continue to contain him in game number 1. That will need to continue, obviously, in game 2, because if you're keeping Anthony Edwards out of the paint and keeping him from getting downhill, he's not able to have the kind of impact, especially with the vertical game, to be able to put it on guys' head, as far as his dunking ability and his ability to finish at the rim. So I thought that was extremely good from the Mavericks in game 1, keeping Anthony Edwards to a jump shooter, only 4 shots in the restricted area and in the paint, and the Mavericks were able to take advantage of that. In fact, Jason Kidd, speaking to the media on Thursday, detailing what he believes Anthony Edwards will bring as far as a bounce-back game and what the Mavericks have to be prepared for when they take on Ant Edwards and the Timberwolves in game 2. Take a listen.
Last night, Ant only got 2 attempts in the restricted area. How much of that do you think was what you guys were doing defensively, and what do you think his response will be? What are you expecting from him tomorrow night?
Yeah, I think for us it's a matter of showing as many bodies, again, making it tough. He's one of the best players in the world. You're not going to stop him. You can just make it tough on him and hope that he misses. We expect him in game 2 to attack early and often. We got to try to protect the paint. They shot, a lot of threes. They were hot early. I thought for us to stay together in that second half to protect the paint. Again, it's tough when you've got Cat and those guys who can put it on the floor and get to the rim. But again, we believe that Ant's going to come. Conley's going to, come. That they're going to be better in game 2. So we have to expect that.
So Jason Kidd expecting Anthony Edwards to come out much more aggressive to try and keep the Timberwolves from going down 0-2 in this series. And Kidd also talking about guarding the three-point line much better, which is another key for the Mavericks going into game 2. We know that the Timberwolves went 18 of 49 from downtown and was really good in the first half, going 11 of 25 from deep, 44% in the first half, including Jaden McDaniels, who went 5 of 6 from downtown in the first half, where, of course, he had the 19 points for the Timberwolves. The Mavericks were much better against the three in the second half, and they will need to continue to do that. The 49 three-pointers that the Timberwolves took in game 1 were the most they had taken in a game all season, and you saw the defensive game plan for the Mavericks, which was to pack the paint and make the Timberwolves a jump shooting team and dare them to beat them from the outside. As we mentioned, they were much better were the Mavericks in the second half when you look at the numbers, particularly from the three-point line, where the Timberwolves were just 7 of 24 in the second half for just 29%. So it was unsustainable for the Timberwolves, especially for Jaden McDaniels, to keep it up late in the game and into the second half. And the Mavericks were able to utilize that strategy effectively enough for them to see the Timberwolves shoot poorly from the three-point line in the second half. But that is the game plan. It was, at least for game 1. Pack the paint on the inside, make the Timberwolves a jump shooting team, dare them to beat you from the outside, and you'll live with some of the three-pointers that they'll take. At times, they were getting 2 wide-open looks when it comes to those three-point shots, but at the same time, Jason Kidd knowing that some of those threes are going to go down that they take. But if you're guarding and getting out to those shooters and contesting those three-point opportunities, you're going to give yourself a really good chance in game 2, much like they were able to do, especially in the second half of game 1 against the Timberwolves. More on the keys to victory and what the Mavericks have to do to try to take a 2-0 series lead against the Minnesota Timberwolves in the Western Conference Finals. But before we get there, let's hear from today's sponsor of our video and our podcast, and let's hear from Aura. Today's video is brought to you by Aura. Do a Google search on your name and email address to see how much information comes up about you. I was devastated by the amount of information that I could be seeing searching my name and profile, and I knew then I needed to be protected for not just myself, but also for my family. Data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email, home address, health records, your relatives, it's all out there. That's why I've been using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. Cleaning up my information not only helps reduce the amount of spam I get, but it protects me from hackers who could use this information to help them access my social media accounts, bank accounts, and other sensitive information. Aura also does so much more to protect me and my family from online threats that I can't see. It's really easy to set up, so I don't have to download several different apps to get things like antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more. I get everything at one affordable price. You may already have one of these tools already, but not having Aura is like locking the front door and leaving the back door wide open. Aura is always on, doing the hard work to protect me and my family so I can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. I value my privacy and I value yours. You can go to aura.com/Kevin Gray to start your 2-week free trial. Please see the link in the description. Back here on Inside the Mavs, thank you for hanging out with us through that spot, and thank you to today's sponsor of our video and our podcast, in Aura, as we get you ready for Game 2 between the Mavericks and the Timberwolves in their best-of-7 series in the Western Conference Finals, with the Mavericks looking to take a 2-0 series lead, while the Timberwolves, I'm sure, will be desperate in Game 2 to avoid an 0-2 hole to try and get it tied at 1 game apiece. But for the Mavericks, the defense that they played, especially in the second half, where they only gave up 43 points to the Timberwolves, that defense will need to continue to carry itself over into Game 2. And especially when you look at the defense that the Mavericks were able to do against the Timberwolves' second-best scorer in Karl-Anthony Towns, where you saw P.J. Washington do a terrific job defensively against him in Game 1, where Cat was 6 of 20, with P.J. Washington as the primary defender. Washington, of course, hitting the go-ahead 3 for the Mavericks with less than 2 minutes left in Game 1 to give them a lead that they would not relinquish. And not only Washington's timely three-point shooting, but his defense on Karl-Anthony Towns particularly was huge in Game number 1. P.J. Washington speaking to the media on Thursday, detailing what the Mavericks must do in order to ensure themselves that they have a chance to win Game 2 on Friday night. Take a listen.
Taking care of the ball, taking easy shots, making our open shots, obviously, and just being ourselves. Playing good defense, not letting those guys get going, and just trying to stick together for 48 minutes.
Making outside shots, being able to communicate on defense, and be able to put themselves in position going into the fourth quarter like they did in Game 1. The Mavericks have a chance to do that, and P.J. Washington, who's been a terrific player in this postseason, particularly in the Oklahoma City Thunder series, has carried that forward and hit timely shots, especially from the corners, where the Mavericks hit 3 big three-pointers from the corners. We mentioned the biggest one with P.J. Washington being able to knock down that left corner 3 off the Kyrie Irving assist to be able to give the Mavericks the lead in Game 1 late to be able to win it. And not only the defense from P.J. Washington, but you saw the defense from Luka Dončić, where he had 2 of his 3 steals in the fourth quarter that really helped put a stamp on this game for the Mavericks defensively. The steal that led to the Kyrie Irving assist to P.J. Washington for the go-ahead three-pointer, and, of course, Luka Dončić getting the steal in the block on Rudy Gobert late in the game as well to preserve the Mavericks' lead. That kind of defensive effort, and one of the best defensive efforts that we've seen from Luka Dončić throughout not just this postseason, but in the overall season itself, that must continue in Game 2 as well, because as long as that defensive effort is there, led by their superstars in Luka Dončić and Kyrie Irving, everyone else has to follow suit. And you give the Mavericks credit for withstanding the punches that the Timberwolves continue to throw in that game, because we know in the postseason, both teams are going to be able to go on runs throughout the course of 48 minutes. And for the Mavericks to be able to see Luka Dončić play the 40 minutes that he did, how fresh he looked, especially in the fourth quarter, where he scored 15 of his 19 second-half points in the final frame. You saw what he was able to do going on that personal 7-0 run to be able to get the Mavericks to lead initially and then be able to close the door with the Mavericks being able to pull away late to be able to win the game. That is the Luka Dončić that we're accustomed to seeing throughout the course of the regular season and in his career, as, of course, he was named first-team All-NBA for the 5th consecutive year. That Luka Dončić, along with Kyrie Irving, as they scored or assisted on 88 of the 108 points that the Mavericks scored in Game 1. Your stars were stars, and they assisted and facilitated the offense and were aggressive, especially Kyrie Irving, with his 24 points in the first half. And that's something else that must continue, not just in Game 2, but really for the rest of this series. The aggressiveness of Kyrie Irving getting into the paint, where the Timberwolves were committed to playing that drop coverage with Rudy Gobert, and you saw how the Mavericks were able to take advantage of that, especially with Kyrie Irving getting into the paint, getting into his spots, hitting the series of floaters that he did, and more importantly, the Mavericks creating a lot of and-one opportunities to be able to not only finish, but also be able to put extra points on the board by getting those and-one opportunities and finishing at the free throw line. You saw that constantly in Game number 1, which means they're getting downhill, getting aggressive, and getting the Timberwolves in positions to commit fouls and to get them into foul trouble. and Kyrie Irving was especially good at that for the Dallas Mavericks. Both he and Luka will continue to have to set the tone where they combine to score 63 of the 108 points that the Mavericks had, but also facilitating for others to be able to hopefully knock down enough shots to be able to win games against the Timberwolves going forward in the rest of this series. But that is going to be a massive point of contention for the Mavericks. Can they continue to get the type of play from their superstars, especially early on in the game, where I mentioned with Kyrie Irving scoring 24 of his 30 in the first half, and then Luka closing the show with 19 of his 33 in the second half. And if you're the Mavericks, what you have to do is to match the desperation of the Minnesota Timberwolves in game 2, because they will be looking to try and tie this series at 1 game apiece. Meanwhile, the Mavericks, it's natural to slip into some complacency after you did the hard part. One of the things that Kyrie Irving mentioned, that you heard at the beginning of the show, is they understood that the Timberwolves, yes, as talented and as deep as they are, they came off a grueling 7-game series against the Denver Nuggets, and they knew that they had a chance to take advantage of an opportunity with some tired legs of Minnesota to be able to put pressure on them and really get after them, and they did that in game 1. I expect the Timberwolves to be much better going into game 2, particularly Anthony Edwards and also Karl Anthony Towns. But at the same time, the Mavericks feel like they've got an advantage with what they've got in their 2 superstars who both have the ability to get buckets in the clutch when they need to, and the other playing off of the other when it comes to Luka Dončić and Kyrie Irving. What is also big for the Mavericks is the size that they have in the middle and the way that they were able to beat the Timberwolves on the glass. You look at the rebounding numbers in game 1. Minnesota was out-rebounded by the Mavericks 48-40, including 11-10 on the offensive glass, and in large part thanks to Derek Lively II, who had 11 rebounds for the Mavericks. Him and Daniel Gafford combining for 20 rebounds in the game, also combining for 19 points. And when you're getting 19 points and 20 rebounds in a combined what was 47 minutes between Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively, that is the kind of production that you're going to need for the rest of the series to match the big front line and front court of the Minnesota Timberwolves, and especially for Derek Lively II, who has been spectacular in this postseason. When you look at the plus-minus numbers that Derek Lively has put up, my man is a plus 106 for the Mavericks in the playoffs so far, while Daniel Gafford in this postseason is a minus 62 with him in the lineup. So more minutes for Derek Lively could be the menu that they continue to move forward with. We just mentioned the minutes distribution in game 1. Derek Lively getting 26 minutes versus Daniel Gafford getting the 21 minutes in game 1. Lively has earned the right to be on the floor for the majority of the time, given the way that he's playing and the intensity that he's bringing on both the offensive and defensive end, and helping out when the Mavericks, when it comes to not only second chance opportunities, but cleaning up on the defensive glass, where the Mavericks out-rebounded the Minnesota Timberwolves 37-30 on the defensive glass. And that is huge, because when you look at the Timberwolves during the regular season, they were number 5 in defensive rebounding at 34.2 defensive boards per game. They were held under that average in game 1. So not only are you creating opportunities in terms of second chance buckets, but you're also cleaning up on the defensive glass, holding the Timberwolves to just 1 possession to be able to give yourself more opportunities at the basket. Derek Lively II and the way that the Mavericks continue to rebound will be huge in game 2 and going forward for the rest of the series, for them to be able to control the paint and be able to handle their business there. But the aggressiveness at which the Mavericks come out with, especially in the first quarter, to me will set a tone in how they want to get after Minnesota, and they need to expect a punch from the Timberwolves, who, look, Chris Finch, their head coach, really got after them in terms of their film session on Thursday, with Chris Finch talking about the idea that they made a lot of mistakes that they'll need to clean up going into game 2, and that will be something that I'll be looking forward from the Timberwolves. How much more aggressive will they get Anthony Edwards in terms of involved, in terms of early offense and action there? And then on the defensive end, what kind of adjustments do they make? Do they use a little bit more of Kyle Anderson, who was pretty effective, especially in the first half? You saw what Jaden McDaniels was able to do in the first half against Luka Dončić, but really was not able to handle him, especially in the fourth quarter, and Dončić taking advantage of his size and his physicality to be able to rise up over McDaniels for jumpers, being able to use the subtle push-off, the subtle but effective push-off by Luka Dončić to be able to rise up and hit jumpers over McDaniels. Those are the kinds of things that the experience that the Mavericks have in these situations is going to continue to play itself out. And one thing that you look for, especially in what I believe will be a tight game number 2, is just like we saw in game 1, the poise and the calm demeanor of the Mavericks to stay with the game and allow the game to come to them. We saw a reversal of roles in game 1 where Kyrie Irving was the aggressor to begin the game 1, and then Luka Dončić closing the show, both of them being able to play off of one another, but understanding, allowing the game to come to them and being able to force Anthony Edwards into some shots that he wasn't necessarily wanting to take, especially from the outside. The Mavericks won 23 games in the clutch during the regular season. Only the Lakers had more with 24 wins in clutch games during the regular season. This team knows how to play with poise down the stretch, and you saw that play itself in game number 1. And again, timely shot making from the role players, particularly with PJ Washington Jr. Derrick Jones Jr.'s defense on Anthony Edwards was terrific as well in game 1. He taking the defensive assignment and being able to help shut down Anthony Edwards. His length, his athleticism, and size is going to continue to be a massive factor for the rest of this series. And as long as the Mavericks find themselves continuing to contest three-point shots, forcing the Timberwolves to be a jump shooting team and not allowing them to get downhill and into the paint, but also being able to finish on the defensive glass with defensive rebounds and limiting Rudy Gobert and others to be able to have second chance opportunities, the Mavericks will give themselves a really good shot to win game number 2. And another thing for me that was extremely important for the Mavericks and something that they've been good at for the majority of the season, which is protecting the basketball. Only 13 turnovers in game 1. They were able to force 10 turnovers of the Minnesota Timberwolves, scoring 14 points off of those turnovers. Your ability to protect the basketball and value it on the offensive end, but also limiting the offensive possessions for the Timberwolves is a winning formula for this team. We know how much they like to get out there in terms of pace and what they are able to do. They only had 9 fast break points in game number 1. I expect them to try to up that in game 2, but most importantly, continue to protect and value the basketball, and you'll give yourself a chance to be able to win the game. And the last thing for me, when I look at what the Mavericks were able to do that the Minnesota Timberwolves did not allow during the regular season, the Mavericks dominated in terms of their points in the paint. In fact, the Mavericks scored 62 of their 108 points in the paint, which was massive because when you look at what the Minnesota Timberwolves did during the regular season, they allowed the second fewest points in the paint during this NBA season. And part of that was, again, the Timberwolves committing to that drop coverage, but the Mavericks getting themselves into the paint, into the restricted area, and being able to finish with Kyrie Irving and Luka Dončić and others being able to finish at the rim and getting some of that vertical game going, like you saw at the beginning of the third quarter where Daniel Gafford scored the first 6 points of the Mavericks in that third period, a couple of those on dunks, working the vertical game and working the pick and roll. So for the Mavericks, more of the same when it comes to figuring out how to get into the paint and into the restricted area to not only finish at the rim, but create additional and one opportunities to get extra points at the free throw line. I thought that was huge in game 1. That has to continue in game 2. And if they can and knock down and be better from the 3-point line, which you saw, of course, in game 1, the Mavericks were just 6 of 25 from downtown at 24%, but they went 37 of 62 on their 2-point field goals at a near 60% clip. If you can get yourself to around 30 to 35% from the 3-point line, the Mavericks, who didn't play their best game offensively from the 3-point line and were still able to find a way to win, that should give you a lot of confidence about the way that they're playing right now, that they didn't get their best offensive game from 3, but their superstars made the clutch plays when they needed to, especially Luka Dončić in the fourth quarter, and you dominated in the paint. You got the production from your centers with the 19 points and the 20 rebounds that you had between Gafford and Lively. PJ Washington with a terrific defense on Karl Anthony Towns. Derrick Jones Jr. with his great defense on Anthony Edwards, forcing him to take tough shots and be a jump shooter. All of these things for the Mavericks. And again, they were able to be the ones at the free throw line that went 16 of 17 at 94%. A team that hasn't been shooting the free throws well during this postseason. Again, getting opportunities to take advantage of easy points, and they did that in game one. So a lot to like from what they did in that first game that you want to see to continue. But for me, you have to play with a sense of desperation if you're the Dallas Mavericks, if you want to find a way to take a 2-0 series lead and put Minnesota in a really bad spot, being down 0-2 coming back to Dallas. You've already gotten the home court advantage. You already have earned the split. Now how much more greedy can you get if you're Dallas going into Minnesota one more time to try and take that 2-0 series lead? The pressure will be on Minnesota to be able to withstand what I believe will be a very loose, very excited and fun group for this Mavericks team, knowing what the opportunity is in front of them. And I expect Luka Dončić to remain extremely aggressive. It looks like he's finding his footing, and you saw that him be able to take over in the fourth quarter for the Mavericks. And if that is the Luka Dončić that we're getting, we've already heard the motivation that Kyrie Irving is playing with based off of what Anthony Edwards said going into the series against the Mavericks. And now Luka playing at an all-NBA level, being as healthy as he's going to be for the rest of this postseason. The Mavericks should be the ones playing with the aggression to be able to try and get this thing back to Dallas up 2-0. But I do expect Minnesota to play with a fire and a hunger befitting of their young superstar in Anthony Edwards, who we know can play with that kind of fervor and intensity. It will be incumbent on the rest of his teammates to come with him if they try to want to even the series at one game apiece. But if you're the Mavericks and you're a Mavericks fan, you love what you saw in game one, handled the business that they need to, and now look forward to try and get that much more greedy going into game number two, and we will see what that game brings between the Mavericks and the Timberwolves. Game number two will tip off at 7:30 p.m. at Target Center in Minnesota. I'll have the pregame show on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network beginning at 7 p.m. as the Dallas Mavericks, already up 1-0 after their 108-105 win on Wednesday, look to take a huge 2-0 series lead before coming back to Dallas. Meanwhile, the Timberwolves trying to avoid an 0-2 hole before they head back to Dallas. I'm sure we'll be playing with a sense of urgency in the second game of this best-of-7 series. That'll do it for this episode of Inside the Mavs. Again, thank you so much for joining me here on this episode. Make sure you download and subscribe to the Inside the Mavs podcast wherever you get your podcasts for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. And if you're watching this on my YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports, make sure you like and comment on the video as well. Let me know how you're feeling about the Mavericks going into game number two. And you can follow me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports for all of your Mavericks coverage. You can also follow Grant Afseth on Twitter as well at the same, and of course on his YouTube channel at Grant Afseth. Again, my name is Kevin Gray, Mavericks Pre and Post Game host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. This has been Inside the Mavs, presented by Aura.